ladies and gentlemen, side proposition painted a picture where in dictatorships, people's voices are entirely drowned. In side opposition today, we actually have a contrasting picture. We think it took 50 years for the people being repressed in dictatorial regimes from relying on the CIA-sponsored assassinations that only ushered in a new era of dictatorship towards the Arab Spring, where people tried to fight for their own futures, where credible oppositions could be built instead of the hugely efficient but hugely detrimental arena that assassination actually creates. On side opposition today, we're going to bring to you two major arguments. Firstly, we're going to talk to you about the legal principle of why extrajudicial killings are never viable. Secondly, we're going to look at the practical impact on these dictatorships, and why we think there are only three paths to go, and all of them means all hell breaks loose. But before we go on to those two major arguments, let's begin with what opponents actually brought to us, because they brought us three major arguments. They began with the principle and how they want to minimize damage. Secondly, they talked about unpredictability and finding this catalyst in toppling dictatorial regimes. Now, firstly, we want to contest this, because I asked them in the POI about whether they want to assassinate Kim Jong-un, and their response was, oh, today we're not going to talk about specific dictators, we're going to talk about the general principle. What that shows, ladies and gentlemen, is that they have no idea what kind of last resort they're talking about, what kind of situation they're talking about. Why are they so fearful of telling us that, ladies and gentlemen? Because they know if they said they would assassinate Kim Jong-un, his uncle is going to take over with all the military and nothing is going to change. That is the reality side opposition wants to paint. So let's begin with the principle they gave us. Because basically our opponents had 2 points. Firstly, they said, oh, they're militarily backed and they're backed in the corner. They'll do really crazy things. So you kill him with all the institutions in place, entrenched interests they're going to take over right away? No, ladies and gentlemen, we don't think that logic works. But secondly, they have this major assumption that basically predicates the entire case, that all of the power in dictatorships root from one single person, and when you remove this person, it's going to magically disappear. No, ladies and gentlemen. Most of these people, including people like Bashar al-Assad, including people like Kim Jong-un, all of these people grant specific powers to people with special relationships around them, a sort of crony of special people they like. All of these people won't be killed unless you want to wipe out the entire ruling class in these countries, ladies and gentlemen. These people are going to take over, or they're going to fight with each other and descend this whole country into civil war. It's not going to work, ladies and gentlemen. Second major argument they gave us, you can't estimate dictators' actions. They said, well, when you back them into a corner, they're going to go crazy. First of all, we contest this. We say that in fact dictators do have political calculus. They're more predictable in the same way Bashar al-Assad at the moment is continually conceding to their people. Basically saying, why don't we change a bit of the constitution? Why don't we concede some more to you? These people do know political calculus. But more importantly, we need to put this in context. What are we actually facing here? If we don't take away these people with some form of rational political calculus, you have a whole all-hell scenario where all of these people, warlords and their own special interests, the military fighting against each other. All of these people are unpredictable. Ladies and gentlemen, it's even worse. So ladies and gentlemen, we believe that both of their arguments have entirely crumbled. And finally, when they told us about this idea of, well, when you remove this, it will slowly break down. Well, we said no. If you kill Fidel Castro, Raul Castro has already taken over. It's going to take over, ladies and gentlemen. It's not going to change anything. But more importantly, let's assume they're really so brainwashed, right? As they said, they have a whole brainwashed regime, right? Then all the people are going to rise up and say a foreign country just assassinated our leader. We hate them. We want to invade their country. The same thing that happened in the Rwandan massacre. When their leader died in a plane crash, people said the Hutus assassinated them, started a whole civil war and a whole genocide in their own country. Ladies and gentlemen, not working. All three of the arguments have entirely crumbled. So let's begin with our own case. What are we actually going to today? Side opposition is a rational side. We're going to tell you about, firstly, the whole idea of the legal principle we need to stand for. This whole idea that extrajudicial killings are never, ever justified. First, we need to analyze. Why do we want to depose these dictators in the very first place? Because we think, as they conceded, they're taking law into their own hands. They're basically determined by personal interest, and they're doing it by dominating what the legal system considers as right and wrong. Secondly, they're basically actively killing their own people. Let's compare this to what our opponents are suggesting. They're basically saying, in this whole international arena where there is already international consensus, that these dictators need to be tried in an international criminal court, they will take the law into their own hands and kill them. Ladies and gentlemen, we think that in effect, our opponents are committing the same mistake dictators have committed from the very first place. Extrajudicial killings are never justified. But why do we think there's international consensus, no thank you ma'am, on the fact that international law should be used to judge these dictators? We look at people like Charles Taylor, who was successively indicted by an international court and basically sentenced to 50 years in prison. We think this is a far better way, ladies and gentlemen, to give the people justice and not to use the dictator's own methods to indict themselves. We think it's a far better way for a justified system that is regulated to do this. More importantly, we think that when you're actually trying to do a secret assassination of these dictators, you'll never be able to find international consensus. It will always be unilateral action. Why? Because are you going to go to the United Nations and start a resolution of we want to assassinate Kim Jong-un? What's Kim Jong-un going to react by? I'm going to start a nuclear weapon before you kill me, ladies and gentlemen. It doesn't work that way. So let's move on to our second major argument, this idea that we're exacerbating existent conflicts. Now, firstly, we need to look at the efficient nature of assassination.
Sir.
Because it happens too quickly. I'm going to take you right now.
Sir, I don't think the heinous crimes that some of these dictators actually commit actually takes an international consensus to actually condemn this person.
Hi, ma'am, that was not what I was saying, right? Basically, even if you have like international consensus, or if you're doing it unilaterally, it's still wrong because extrajudicial killings are never justified. You should go through an international legal process to indict them. It's not simply about the consensus to kill that person in the very first place. Moving on with that whole idea of efficient nature of assassination. Because it's too quick, ladies and gentlemen. There's no time to build a credible opposition such as the National Transitional Council that is trying to be built in Syria right now. It just happens instantaneously, dictator is dead. Now you need an immediate replacement for him. Our question inside opposition is very simple. Who's left? We think there are three paths. All of them are really, really bad. The first major path you could choose is basically the military and existent interests. We think that when you need immediate change, the military is the only kind of interest which has the firepower to take over the country and basically impose a regime of fear. That's usually what happens. Now imagine this. In Thailand, when someone was normally basically removed, the military took over. If you imagine even in North Korea, Kim Jong-un, his uncle basically owns the entire country with the military. The military is going to take over. We think the centralization of power means that the military is the only actor that is ready. But secondly, let's also look at this whole idea of the lack of credible opposition and how this could descend into warlordism. Because if no one is ready for it, all of these interests will basically think, here's an opportunity to take over power. These are people who back at the dictatorial regimes, had all the money, dominated the ruling classes, who also had some form of firepower, supported relationships within the military. These people would send into a factional fight. Even if you do have some kind of credible position, such as Morgan Tsvangirai, who basically is in a power-sharing relationship with Robert Mugabe. If Robert Mugabe dies today, ladies and gentlemen, his own cronies are going to fight against Morgan Tsvangirai anyway. So credible position doesn't make a difference either, ladies and gentlemen. It's always going to be bad. But finally, we have this final point about backlash. Because we think that in fact, on the other whole basic scenario, we think that what's going to happen is that you're going to send these whole dictatorships from one single person's power towards a whole bunch of people they loved in the back then fighting against each other. We think that's even more unpredictable and even more destructive. That's why we're very proud to oppose.